It happened in seconds, but the scream will echo in my memory forever. One moment, Ava was inching her way up our driveway in her wheelchair, smiling proudly as she maneuvered around the puddles left by the morning rain. The next, she was soaking wet, gasping, her body trembling under a cold jet of water sprayed straight into her face like she was trash. I dropped the grocery bags, sprinting toward her, my heart slamming against my ribs. "Ava!" I shouted, but she couldn't answer. Her hands were shaking too hard to reach her speech device, and her curls clung to her face, dripping, her clothes plastered to her small frame. Standing at the edge of the sidewalk, smug and composed, was Karen, garden hose still in hand, finger on the trigger like it was a weapon of righteousness. "You need to control that chair," she snapped, her voice clipped and matter-of-fact. She dragged mud onto my side again. "I'm sick of the mess." I couldn't speak. I couldn't even breathe. I dropped to my knees in front of Ava, shielding her with my body, grabbing a towel from my bag and wrapping it around her shoulders. Her lips were blue. She was sobbing. The water had hit her so hard it had knocked her joystick out of alignment. She wasn't just wet, she was humiliated, afraid, confused. I turned toward Karen, rage flooding through me like electricity. "You sprayed a child," I growled. "You sprayed a disabled child in a wheelchair." Karen crossed her arms, showing no remorse. Then maybe she shouldn't roll her dirty wheels across my driveway. I just had it power washed. My hands clenched so tight, I thought my bones might break. I wanted to scream, to lunge, to call the police right then. But Ava was shivering and she needed me. Karen turned her back and walked away without another word, her hose trailing behind her like a snake. I picked Ava up and carried her inside, her chair dragging behind us, wheels slick and dripping. That moment, right there on that wet concrete, changed everything because I realized then this wasn't just about dirt. This was about a woman who saw my daughter's existence as an inconvenience. And if she was willing to spray down a child with cold water just to keep her pavement clean, what else was she capable of? We moved into Willow Grove for a fresh start. The brochure had promised quiet streets, friendly neighbors, well-maintained sidewalks, and a strong sense of community. After everything Ava had been through, years of hospital stays, therapy appointments, and near-constant transitions, we needed peace. We needed safety. She was born with cerebral palsy that affected both her mobility and muscle coordination, making a wheelchair not just an aid, but a lifeline. When we toured the house on Juniper Lane, Ava lit up at the long, smooth driveway and the gently sloped curb. "I can go fast here," she giggled, tapping her speech device. That was all I needed to hear. We put in an offer that week, using every dollar we had saved. I didn't care that the HOA had strict landscaping rules or that there was a newsletter detailing what type of mailbox you could have. I told myself those things meant the neighborhood cared enough to protect families like ours. For the first 6 months, we lived quietly. I kept the grass trimmed exactly to regulation length. I made sure the trash bins were pulled in no later than 6 p.m. on pickup day. I even used HOA-approved paint chips when refreshing the trim on our garage door. I was determined not to draw attention. We weren't there to cause problems. We just wanted to belong. Ava loved rolling up and down the driveway. It was her sense of independence, her way of participating in a world that often moved too fast or wasn't built for her. She would draw chalk rainbows near the curb, wave to neighbors walking their dogs, and shout hello with her hands. Most people smiled. A few waved. No one really stopped to talk. And that was okay. I didn't need friendships. I just needed tolerance. But things changed after the first rainstorm in spring. Ava had been out playing near the curb, rolling through a few shallow puddles, when her wheels picked up some soft mud. She made her way back toward our front door, leaving faint streaks on the shared strip of driveway we shared with Karen's house. I didn't even notice until next morning when I saw it, a printed note taped to our door in a clear plastic sleeve. It read, "Please be mindful of driveway cleanliness. Tracks from assistive devices must be cleaned immediately to preserve property value. This is not a public sidewalk. It wasn't signed, but I didn't have to guess. Karen's house sat directly across from ours, immaculate lawn, beige shutters, precisely two ceramic owls perched on either side of her porch. She always kept her car tires aligned perfectly with the edges of her driveway, like it was a parking lot for royalty. I remember crumpling the note in my hand, feeling that sinking feeling in my chest, the one you get when you realize someone doesn't see your child as a child, but as a disruption. Still, I try to smooth things over. I knocked on Karen's door that afternoon with Ava beside me. She opened it a crack, looked us over, and offered that strained smile, tight at the eyes, empty of warmth. "Hi," I began. "I saw the note. I'm sorry about the marks." It rained, and I didn't realize she cut me off. "Yes, well, that's the thing with wheelchairs. They track everything. Mud, dirt, debris. My husband's a clean freak, and we just resealed the concrete." Her eyes shifted to Ava, who was clutching a small drawing she'd made, two houses, a rainbow, and the words "Hi Neighbor" in bright crayon. Karen didn't take it. She just said, maybe she can stick to the lawn from now on. That would be easier for everyone. I felt my stomach twist. "She's just a child," I replied. "This is our driveway, too." Karen's smile disappeared. Driveways are shared responsibility. That includes shared cleanliness. If it becomes a pattern, I'll have to report it. Then she shut the door. No goodbye. No thank you for the drawing. Just a closed door and a world of judgment between us. From that day on, I noticed her watching. Every time Ava rolled outside, Karen peeked through her blinds. When we hosted a small birthday dinner for Ava's cousin, she filed a noise complaint at 6:45 in the evening. I received a citation for improper signage after Ava wrote "Happy Spring" in chalk on our front step. It was never open hostility. It was paper cuts. Small, silent stabs that made it clear we weren't welcome. And the HOA? They never questioned her. She was on the compliance committee. Her complaints carried weight. Ours were under review. I kept cleaning, kept smiling, kept hoping it would blow over. I didn't want to fight. I just wanted my daughter to roll up her driveway without being surveilled like a criminal. But I should have known that Karen wasn't content with watching. She wanted control. And control, when challenged, becomes cruelty. I had no idea just how far she was willing to go until the hose came out. Karen introduced herself to us 2 days after we moved in, not with a welcome basket or a smile, but with a warning. She knocked on our door precisely at 7:02 a.m., clipboard in hand, her beige cardigan matching the shutters on her spotless home across the street. "Hi, I'm Karen, head of the HOA Compliance Committee," she chirped, her voice sugar-dipped but tight around the edges. "Just making my rounds to help new families settle in, and to remind you of a few important guidelines." She handed me a laminated trifold brochure titled Maintaining Harmony at Willow Grove. No eye contact, no curiosity about who we were, just policy. She glanced over my shoulder at the still-packed boxes near the entryway, then down at Ava, who was sitting quietly in her chair, a coloring book resting in her lap. Karen's smile faltered for just a second, like a glitch in her system, before reappearing even more strained. And, of course, we're always mindful of, equipment. She said that word like she was referencing a lawnmower, not my daughter. Just make sure wheels don't leave marks on common property. Some residents are quite particular. I stared at her, unsure if I was supposed to thank her for the heads up or apologize for existing. Over the weeks that followed, that smile became a symbol. Whenever Ava rolled outside, whether it was to draw chalk butterflies, ride the gentle slope of the driveway, or just get some fresh air, Karen was there. Sometimes she stood on her porch, watering plants that didn't need watering. Other times she hovered by her mailbox long after the mail had been collected, eyes narrowed behind oversized sunglasses. And always she smiled. But it wasn't the warm, neighborly kind. It was the kind of smile that warned you not to get too comfortable. Once, when Ava rolled down our driveway, a bit faster than usual, hitting a small bump that caused one of her chair wheels to kick up a little splash from the edge of the garden bed, Karen actually came over with paper towels Just thought I'd help tidy that, she said, blotting the dry concrete with exaggerated care. Then she handed me a folded paper with a printout from the HOA handbook highlighted section. All homeowners are responsible for keeping shared surfaces free of visible dirt, tire marks, or debris. Just so you're aware, she said, still smiling. It didn't stop there. She began snapping pictures of the sidewalk, of Ava's chair, even of our trash bins if they weren't perfectly aligned. When I confronted her, she claimed it was for documentation in case of disputes. I asked what dispute she was expecting. She didn't answer. Instead, she said, I read in an accessibility blog that some parents put down rubber entry pads to minimize dirt from wheelchairs. Have you considered that? Or maybe just keeping her on the grass path? Less friction, and it keeps things cleaner. Her tone was so casual, so clinical, as if she were talking about home renovation, not my child. She's a little girl, I replied, not a mop. Karen tilted her head, just offering solutions. Letters began arriving, HOA warnings citing vague complaints, excessive use of driveway, tracking of foreign debris, inconsistent maintenance of shared surfaces. Each one felt more surreal than the last. We cleaned every day. We pressure washed the sidewalk weekly. I even bought special tread brushes for Ava's chair wheels just to avoid confrontation. Still, the letters kept coming, and always they ended with the same cold line. Failure to comply may result in fines or community action. The final straw came one afternoon when Ava was drawing on the sidewalk. A few friends from her therapy center had come by. They were laughing, coloring butterflies, chatting in their own beautiful way. That's when Karen approached, arms crossed, lips pressed in. Sidewalk chalk is a gray area, she said. Some neighbors consider it graffiti. I blinked. It's washable. It's children's art. She gestured to a smudge of pink near the curb. It's bright, distracting. We value uniformity here. I looked down at Ava, who was holding a stick of yellow chalk and had just started writing her name. Her face fell. Slowly, she lowered her hand and erased the letters. That's when I knew. Karen didn't care about rules. She cared about control. And Ava, simply by existing in her wheelchair and daring to leave a mark, had become a target. Karen's smile wasn't kindness, it was a warning. And I had just missed it the first time. It started with one letter. A thin white envelope in the mailbox, stamped with the official Willow Grove HOA logo. At first, I thought it might be a reminder about a community event or a newsletter. Instead, it was a notice of property concern. The reason? Repeated evidence of soiling on the shared driveway, likely due to improper tire hygiene. Improper tire hygiene? I blinked, rereading the line like maybe I had misunderstood it. But no. It was referring to Ava's wheelchair. That much was obvious. There had been a light drizzle that morning, and Ava had rolled back and forth a few times while waiting for the accessible van to arrive. Her wheels left faint gray streaks, marks no worse than any bike or stroller would leave. But this wasn't about marks. This was about Ava leaving evidence that she existed. Karen had finally put it in writing, and now she was hiding behind official HOA stationery to make it look like law. I shook with rage. I responded with photos of the cleaned driveway, a note explaining that we washed and maintained the surface weekly, and a copy of the ADA's public accommodations policy, just to remind them of what kind of line they were towing. I never got a reply. Just another envelope, this time marked second notice. Soon, the letters came weekly. Each one more ridiculous than the last. Unapproved surface use, unpermitted visual clutter, potential environmental hazard due to standing water tracked indoors. That one made me laugh in disbelief, until I remembered that every time I laughed, Ava was the one who suffered. She asked me once why she was getting us in trouble. My heart broke. You're not, I told her. You're the reason I have the strength to keep fighting. But she didn't smile. She just nodded solemnly and stared out the window. She had started to dread going outside. The driveway, the path that had once represented freedom, was now a gauntlet. Because Karen didn't just send letters. She stared. Every time we left the house. Every time the bus dropped Ava off, every time she tried to play in the front yard, Karen stood behind her curtain or on her porch, arms crossed, sunglasses on, watching like a sentry, guarding a world we weren't allowed to belong to. And then came the wipes. One afternoon, I opened the front door to find a sealed pack of heavy-duty cleaning wipes taped to the handle with a sticky note on top. Maybe these will help prevent more complaints. No signature, but I knew who it was from. That was the day I finally called the HOA president. I tried to keep my voice calm as I explained everything, the letters, the notes, the targeted hostility. He responded with a sigh and a disinterested, "We'll look into it." But they never did. And Karen? She doubled down. That week, we received a notice that we were being monitored for ongoing surface sanitation concerns. A monitor? For our driveway? It wasn't just letters and notes anymore. The neighborhood shifted. Neighbors who used to wave now looked away. One mother steered her toddler to the opposite side of the sidewalk when we rolled by. Another neighbor I barely knew muttered, "Some of us just like things clean," under his breath when Ava accidentally tracked wet leaves from the grass onto the pavement. We were becoming pariahs, and all for the sin of trying to live with dignity. I started documenting everything: photos, timestamps, videos of Karen watching us from her porch. But it felt like fighting fog. The rules were vague enough to justify anything, and the people around us were too afraid or too apathetic to stand up. I started changing our routines, avoiding the driveway, rolling Ava along the grass, even though it jolted her wheelchair and made her uncomfortable. I hated that I was adjusting her world to avoid conflict. I hated that I was shrinking our lives to fit into Karen's mold. But what I hated more than anything was the fear, because I knew it wouldn't stop. The letters weren't the end. They were the beginning. The pressure was building. The cruelty was sharpening. And every time Ava rolled over that shared piece of concrete, I saw Karen's smile in my mind. That tight, calculated smile, like she was waiting for us to cross one more invisible line. And in the back of my mind, I began to wonder what happens when someone like Karen decides she's done being subtle. It had rained the night before, one of those early summer storms that rolls through at midnight and leaves everything glistening by morning. The air was warm, but the ground was soft and slick, the kind of wet that clings to wheels and shoes no matter how careful you are. Ava had physical therapy that morning, and like always, she insisted on rolling herself out the door. "I'm strong today," she typed proudly on her speech device, a soft little grin on her face. I smiled back and let her take the lead, watching her maneuver down the ramp we had built with such care, her hands steady on the controls. But as she reached the bottom of the slope and turned onto the shared driveway, her wheels picked up a thin ribbon of wet dirt from the patch of grass beside it. Nothing more than the trace you'd expect from any stroller or bicycle tire. She didn't notice. She was just happy to be moving on her own, just like any other child. I stepped inside for 2 seconds just to grab her water bottle and jacket, and that's all it took. I heard her scream. Not a worded cry, not a whimper. A raw, sharp, instinctual shriek, the kind that makes a mother's blood run cold. I dropped everything and tore out the door. What I saw stopped me mid-run. Ava was frozen in place, soaked from head to toe, her hair clinging to her face, water dripping off her lashes. Her wheelchair joystick was twitching slightly, the front wheels jerked awkwardly toward the curb, stuck. Across from her, hose still aimed like a rifle, was Karen. She stood on her perfectly swept porch, one hand on her hip, the other gripping her green garden hose as if it were a baton of justice. The nozzle was still half squeezed, water dripping from the spout. Her mouth was tight, her jaw sharp with indignation. "Keep your mess off my driveway," she spat. "This is the 3rd time this week. I warned you." I stood between them instantly, shielding Ava with my body, my arms out like wings. "What did you just do?" I screamed, my voice shaking. "She's a child, a disabled child." Karen didn't flinch. "Then maybe you should teach her not to track mud onto other people's property," she said calmly, her eyes like stone. "I just had the surface cleaned. You people think your problems excuse everything. You people. The words rattled inside me like a bomb. My daughter, still crying, tried to reach her device with trembling fingers, but it had shorted out, the water had soaked the screen. I grabbed it and cradled her against me, frantically trying to dry her off with my sweater. "She's freezing," I shouted. "You assaulted her." Karen rolled her eyes. "It's water. She'll live. Maybe next time she'll stay on the grass where she belongs." Stay on the grass? She said it like Ava was a stray dog. Neighbors began to peek out of their windows. Some stood behind half-closed blinds. Some stepped outside but didn't move past their porches. Watching, not helping. One man across the street held a cup of coffee and simply turned away. I scooped Ava into my arms, her small, wet body shaking against mine, and lifted her back toward our front door. Her chair dragged behind us, the wheels squeaking, mud and water streaking behind her like a trail of shame. Karen didn't offer an apology. She didn't even pretend to care. She just stood there, hose still coiled at her feet, smug and unbothered. Inside, I wrapped Ava in blankets, dried her hair, and put socks on her feet. She didn't say a word. Not with her mouth, not with her hands. Just stared at the floor, dazed, her eyes hollow. When I asked if she was okay, she didn't nod. She didn't shake her head. She just stared. Later, when the screen on her device finally flickered back to life, she typed one sentence, one that made me collapse into tears beside her. Why did she wash me like garbage? I couldn't answer. I couldn't fix what had just happened. But in that moment, something inside me snapped. This was no longer about peace. This was about justice. Karen had crossed a line that no law, no policy, no HOA bylaw could justify. She had weaponized shame and power and sprayed it at a child. And I was going to make sure the whole world knew. The house felt different after that day, quieter, heavier. The warmth that Ava used to bring into every corner with her laughter and tapping speech device was gone, replaced by a stillness I couldn't shake. She didn't want to go outside, not to the driveway, not to the porch, not even to sit near the window, which she used to love. The sight of sunlight on the concrete made her flinch. She avoided her wheelchair for hours at a time, choosing to lie in bed, wrapped in blankets, even though she couldn't get around without it. When I asked if she wanted to go to the park, she typed, "No grass, no hose." That's when I realized how deep the trauma had gone. It wasn't just about being wet. It was about being targeted. She hadn't just been physically soaked. She'd been emotionally stripped of her confidence, her joy, her place. She believed, somehow, that she had done something wrong. That existing outside our front door was an offense. The silence from the HOA was worse than Karen's words. I filed a formal complaint that very night, complete with time-stamped photos, a written statement, and footage from our neighbor's doorbell cam. A blurry but unmistakable shot of Karen holding the hose, Ava's silhouette in her chair at the end of the stream. I sent it via email, certified mail, and even hand-delivered a copy to the HOA office Dropbox. I waited. A day passed. Then another. No phone call. No email. No acknowledgement. On the third day, I received a generic notice from the board's secretary stating that neighbor disputes should be resolved amicably and not escalated through public channels. Public channels? They made it sound like I had blasted Karen's name across social media. All I wanted was acknowledgement, an apology, something. But instead, I got silence, and a veiled threat not to embarrass the HOA. The neighbors weren't much better. The same people who had once nodded politely at us during evening walks now crossed the street when they saw us coming. One woman who used to wave at Ava when walking her dog avoided eye contact entirely. No one brought food. No one asked if Ava was okay. The family next door, who had seen Karen spraying her, closed their curtains and said nothing. The message was clear: don't make waves. Keep quiet. HOA harmony above all. I wasn't just fighting Karen. I was fighting an entire system built on silence and complicity. And Ava felt it too. She started waking up with nightmares, her tiny hands clutching the edge of her blanket in the middle of the night. "The hose is coming," she typed one night, her eyes wide with fear. I held her and rocked her until she fell asleep, whispering that she was safe now. but I wasn't sure I believed it. Because how do you protect your child from a threat that wears khakis, holds a clipboard, and hides behind a smile? Karen didn't need to touch her again. She had already succeeded in making our lives smaller. I tried reaching out to a disability advocate in the next town over. When she heard the story, she gasped, then paused. "This isn't just discrimination," she said. "This is trauma. You need to get this out there. People need to see what's happening in these neighborhoods." I hesitated. Part of me still wanted to believe things would correct themselves, that maybe Karen would apologize, that maybe the HOA would realize what they'd allowed and do the right thing. But they didn't. And by the end of that week, I received another letter, this time accusing us of inflammatory behavior for engaging in continued complaints without resolution, as if filing a report about my child being assaulted with a garden hose was the problem. That's when I knew silence wasn't safety. Silence was surrender. And if no one else would speak up, I would. Because Ava deserved more than a life spent hiding behind blinds and fearing the next knock on the door. She deserved a driveway she could roll down without shame. And if Karen and the HOA thought they could erase her dignity with a hose and a warning letter, they were about to learn just how loud a mother can become when her child's humanity is on the line. I had always believed that keeping my head down would protect us, that if we just followed the rules, kept to ourselves, and stayed polite, even when we were hurting, people would leave us in peace. But after watching my daughter tremble in her bed, too afraid to go outside because a grown woman with a hose decided she was filth, I knew those days were over. I wasn't going to beg for compassion anymore. I was going to demand accountability. So I started gathering every scrap of evidence we had. I compiled time-stamped screenshots, security footage from a neighbor's doorbell cam that showed Karen walking out with the hose and clearly aiming it toward Ava. I took close-ups of Ava's soaked clothes, the streaks on her chair, the glitching screen of her speech device, and even the faint track her wheels had made. The crime that sparked it all. Then I found the letters every HOA warning Karen had ever weaponized. I laid them out on the floor like pieces in a war plan. I was done waiting for someone to give me permission to be outraged. I had every reason, and now I had every receipt. I reached out to a local ADA attorney first, someone who had represented families facing discrimination from housing associations. She listened quietly, then said, "You have a case, and the world needs to see it." She helped me file the initial complaint with the Department of Justice under the Americans with Disabilities Act. We gathered statements from therapists, neighbors who were finally brave enough to admit what they'd witnessed, and medical professionals who attested to the psychological harm this event had inflicted on Ava. But legal action takes time, and what Ava needed, was for people to know now. So I wrote it down. I told the story not as a legal document, not as an angry rant, but as a mother who watched her disabled daughter be treated like trash, sprayed with water, because her wheels weren't welcome in a neighborhood that claimed to be inclusive. I posted it on a Facebook parenting group, one with a large national following for families raising kids with disabilities. I uploaded the blurry image of Ava, soaked and sobbing, clutching the towel around her shoulders, her speech device dark and useless beside her. I captioned it with the truth. My daughter was sprayed with a hose by a woman on our HOA board because her wheelchair left mud on the driveway. This is what ableism looks like. Within 12 hours, the post had been shared over 15,000 times. Within a day, it was 50,000. Messages flooded my inbox, outrage, heartbreak, and stories just like ours. Mothers from across the country told me about fines for therapy swings, citations for wheelchair ramps being aesthetic disruptions, and boards threatening eviction over harmless ADA modifications. The story caught the attention of a local journalist, then a national one. And then came the media vans. They parked outside the HOA building outside our house and outside Karen's. Reporters knocked. Microphones were held out. Karen refused to speak, slamming the door on cameras and hiding behind blinds that used to twitch open every time we stepped outside. But the truth was already out. News anchors showed Ava's photo alongside the HOA's official response, which, predictably, was a vague denial about isolated incidents and a commitment to investigate further. But the public didn't buy it. Disability rights organizations reached out, lawyers offered pro bono support, activists rallied behind us. Someone started a GoFundMe to support legal expenses, and within 48 hours, it had surpassed its goal fivefold. More importantly, hundreds of families sent messages of solidarity. Some had been silent victims of HOAs for years. Now they were ready to speak. Even local lawmakers chimed in. One city councilwoman issued a statement condemning discriminatory enforcement of community rules and promised to review local protections for disabled residents. But the moment that shattered me came when Ava, watching the news from her spot on the couch, saw her face on TV. The reporter was speaking about her with dignity, with fury, and Ava looked up at me and typed, "They see me?" I nodded, tears in my throat. "Yes, baby. They see you. They see what happened. And they care." The next morning, there was a chalk message on our driveway. Big, bright, and messy in the best way. "AVA, you are beautiful." It wasn't signed. It didn't have to be. For the first time in weeks, Ava smiled again. A real smile, not one forced to make me feel better. And in that moment, I knew we had started something bigger than a lawsuit. We had sparked a fire, and I would keep feeding it until Karen, the HOA, and every system that allowed this cruelty learned one simple truth: we will not be silent anymore. Karen had spent years building her image. Clean driveways, perfect hedges, HOA rules memorized like scripture. She believed in order and discipline, in keeping people like us on the outside of perfection. But no power built on fear survives exposure. Once our story went national, her control began to crumble. First slowly, then all at once. News outlets ran headlines that made her name synonymous with cruelty. HOA board member sprays disabled child with hose, read one. Another called her the enforcer of cleanliness, even at the cost of humanity. The photo of Ava, soaked and stunned in her chair, staring into the camera with trembling hands, haunted everyone who saw it. It became a symbol of everything wrong with unchecked HOA authority. Suddenly, Karen's name was everywhere, and for once, she couldn't control the narrative. At first, she refused to comment. She locked her doors, turned off her porch lights, and disappeared behind curtains that no longer twitched with curiosity. But silence was no shield. Protesters, real people, many with disabilities or children in wheelchairs, began showing up outside the Willow Grove HOA office. They carried signs that read, "Wheels belong here," and "Accessibility is not a mess." Local news crews followed Karen to her car. Someone caught video of her shoving a camera away, snarling, "It was just water." That clip spread like wildfire. Her house was vandalized, not with damage, but with truth. Chalk messages cover her sidewalk. "Karen can't erase us." "Ava matters." "Kindness," "Cleanliness." The HOA board, once proudly silent, panicked. At an emergency meeting, with dozens of residents watching both in person and via live stream, the board president announced Karen's resignation, effective immediately. What they didn't say was that she had been forced to resign, pressured by legal threats, internal revolt, and the sheer wave of public fury. 2 other board members stepped down within days. A new interim board was elected, this time with parents, advocates, and even a disability rights expert among them. One of their first acts? A complete rewrite of HOA regulations regarding accessibility and personal conduct. They added a new section titled Dignity Provisions, which required any complaint against disabled residents to be vetted for bias and reviewed by an ADA-trained mediator. And in bold letters, they included this line: "Accessibility is not a nuisance. It is a right." Our lawsuit, meanwhile, moved forward. With the help of our attorney and a growing team of advocates, we filed a civil case against both Karen and the HOA for discrimination, emotional abuse, and violation of federal disability protections. The evidence was overwhelming: photos, video footage, witness statements, even HOA emails that showed a pattern of targeted enforcement against families with special needs. Facing the weight of public scrutiny and a legal team ready to fight to the end, they settled out of court. The terms were confidential, but Ava would be taken care of for a long time. More importantly, as part of the settlement, the HOA was required to host quarterly ADA awareness workshops and post permanent signage reminding residents of their obligations under federal law. Karen? She tried to sell her house quietly, but no real estate agent in the area wanted to be associated with her. Her name had become poison. She eventually relocated under a cloud of disgrace. Rumor had it she moved in with a cousin across the state, avoiding the press and changing her last name on social media. She had wanted everything spotless, sterile, without a trace of struggle. But she left behind a legacy of stains she could never wash away. And Ava? She started smiling again. One morning, I found her sitting by the window, watching the driveway, as if reclaiming it. She looked up at me and typed, "Can I go roll again?" My throat tightened. "Yes," I said, "you can roll wherever you want." And we stepped outside, not in fear, but in defiance. The driveway was ours again. And no one, not Karen, not the HOA, not even silence itself, could take that from us anymore. The morning Ava returned to the sidewalk, the sun broke through the clouds like it had been waiting for her. It was quiet, almost reverent, as she slowly rolled down the ramp with a soft, determined look on her face. Her new wheelchair gleamed in the light, reinforced and repainted in bright teal and purple, her favorite colors. I walked beside her, heart pounding, every nerve alive with emotion. It had been weeks since the incident. Weeks of trauma, court dates, headlines, and hard-fought victories. But this moment, this small journey down a concrete path, felt like the most important one yet. She paused at the edge of the driveway, the same strip of pavement where she had been humiliated and soaked, and looked up at me. Then she reached for her speech device and typed one word. Again. So we rolled. Slowly, then faster, her hands confidently maneuvering her joystick, a spark returned to her eyes. And as we made our way down the sidewalk, something incredible happened. Our neighbors came out. One by one, they stepped onto their porches, waving, smiling, holding boxes of chalk and handmade signs. Some of them had stayed silent too long, but now they were ready to do something different. A little girl from 2 houses down ran up with a pail of sidewalk chalk and asked, "Can we color with Ava?" I looked at Ava, who nodded so hard I thought her curls would bounce off her head. Within minutes, the sidewalk was covered in color. Rainbows, butterflies, sunbeams. Dozens of messages bloomed across the concrete like flowers in spring. "Welcome back, Ava. You are brave. Wheels are welcome here." We painted the driveway last. It started with Ava drawing a big, lopsided heart. Then I added a swirl of color around it. And then neighbors joined in, grown adults crouching down on their knees, coloring like kids again, reclaiming the space that had once been used to shame and exclude. The driveway that Karen had fought so hard to keep clean was now the brightest, most joyful patch of sidewalk in the neighborhood. People driving by slowed down to stare. Some even parked and got out to ask if they could help. That afternoon, a local art teacher offered to seal the chalk mural under a protective coating so it wouldn't wash away. She made history here, he said. Let's make it last. The ramp was rebuilt, too, this time with city funds, pressure-treated wood, and bright yellow safety rails. The HOA, under its new leadership, voted unanimously to install 3 more ramps throughout the neighborhood. They even issued a public apology and began featuring Ava's accessibility tip of the month in their newsletter, written with help from her speech therapist. But the most satisfying change of all, Karen's house went up for sale. The listing appeared online with no fanfare, just a grainy photo and the words "motivated seller." Her porch, once guarded like a fortress, stood empty. No more clipboard, no more hose, just silence. Ava rolls freely now, not just on our street, but everywhere. Something in her changed, not broken, but awakened. She's bolder, louder. Sometimes she rolls past where Karen used to stand, pauses, and draws a giant smiley face right in front of her old driveway. And every time she does, I feel the same thing I felt that first morning. Pride, yes, but also awe. Because Ava didn't just reclaim a sidewalk. She reclaimed herself. And in doing so, she gave our whole community a second chance at kindness. If you've made it to the end of Ava's story, I want to thank you, not just for watching, but for listening. For truly hearing what so many families like ours go through every single day under the guise of rules, cleanliness, or community standards. What happened to my daughter wasn't just a cruel act by one woman. It was the result of a system that allows power to go unchecked, that turns compassion into inconvenience, and that too often punishes the most vulnerable among us just for existing. Ava was sprayed down with a hose like she was nothing more than dirt to be washed away. But you know what happened? She rose, she rolled forward, and she reminded an entire neighborhood that being different is not a disruption, it's a gift. Her story reached the world because people like you cared enough to share it. Because enough was finally enough. This is why I created this channel, the HOA Stories. Not to spread hate, but to shine a light, to give voice to the silenced, to protect kids like Ava and families like yours from being buried under paperwork, policies, and prejudice. If you've faced unfair HOA treatment, if your child has been targeted, fined, or made to feel like they don't belong, we are here for you. And your story deserves to be heard. So please, like, comment, subscribe, and most importantly, share the story. Send it to someone who needs to see what injustice really looks like in perfect neighborhoods. Because until HOAs across the country recognize humanity over regulation, the HOA stories will keep fighting for dignity, for justice, and for every Ava who's ever been told she doesn't belong. We're not done. We're just getting louder.